My father texted me saying family dinner at 7 tonight, important discussion. He thought I would bring my checkbook to save them from bankruptcy. My mother thought I would bring an apology for outshining her golden child. Instead, I walked into that dining room with a bottle of cheap wine in my left hand and my father's tax returns from 2015 in my right hand. They did not know that the $5,000 he gave me 10 years ago, the money he now claims entitles him to half my company, was declared to the IRS as a charitable donation to a needy relative. Tonight, I was not there to save them. I was there to show them exactly what their greed cost. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Sophia and I am 32 years old. Yesterday should have been the happiest day of my life. The air inside the New York Stock Exchange was electric, a physical weight of anticipation that pressed against my chest. I stood on the balcony, my hand hovering over the gavel, waiting for the final 10 seconds of the countdown. Below me, hundreds of traders, analysts, and reporters looked up. Above me, the massive digital screens flashed green. Greenstream Logistics, the company I built from a laptop in a basement, was now debuting on the public market with a valuation of $325 million. I was the first Black woman in the sector to reach this milestone in a decade. The crowd roared as the countdown hit 0. I slammed the gavel down. The bell rang, a sharp, piercing sound that signaled I had officially made it. Confetti rained down, shimmering in the television lights. My CFO Marcus hugged me, tears in his eyes. The applause was deafening. It was the moment every entrepreneur dreams of. But as the cameras panned to capture my reaction, my smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I looked to my left. There, in the prime VIP section reserved for the founder's family, were 4 plush leather chairs. 4 empty chairs. I had sent a private car to pick them up. I had bought them custom outfits. I had arranged for them to be interviewed by major networks about raising a genius daughter. But the seats were vacant, a stark, gaping hole in my moment of glory. A reporter from CNBC thrust a microphone in my face. "Sophia, this is an incredible achievement. Your family must be so proud. Where are they today?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my smile to remain fixed, practicing the stoicism I had perfected over 30 years. "They got stuck in terrible traffic coming from the airport," I lied. My voice was steady, but my stomach turned. "New York traffic is unforgiving, but they are here in spirit." Marcus gave me a sympathetic look. He knew. He knew I had not received a single text message from them all morning. An hour later, I slid into the back of my chauffeured Bentley. The silence of the car was a relief after the chaos of the trading floor. I leaned my head back against the leather seat, closing my eyes. I was worth hundreds of millions of dollars on paper, but I had never felt more isolated. I pulled my phone out of my clutch. Still no text from my father Byron, no call from my mother Viola. Nothing. I opened Instagram, my thumb hovering over the app. Maybe something had happened. Maybe there was an emergency. And then I saw it. The notification at the top of my screen. Keisha is live. My younger sister. The golden child. The influencer with 50,000 followers and $0 in her savings account. I clicked on the notification. The video loaded and the sound of laughter filled the quiet car. My heart stopped. They were not in traffic. They were not in an emergency. They were in a backyard. My parents' backyard. There were pink and blue balloons everywhere. A banner hung between the trees that read, "Paws and Claws Reveal." I watched frozen as my mother Viola held up Keisha's dog, a white poodle named Princess. My father stood next to them, wearing his Sunday best, a grin on his face that he never wore when I showed him my business plans. Everyone is asking, "Is Princess having a boy or a girl?" Keisha shrieked into the camera, her face filtered to perfection. My mother took the microphone. "We are so excited. This is the grand puppy we have been waiting for. Finally, some real news to celebrate in this family. Real pride. The words hit me like a physical slap. Real news. Real pride. I had just become one of the most successful women in the country, and they were popping confetti cannons for a pregnant dog. On the screen, blue confetti exploded. The family cheered. My father hugged Keisha's husband Greg, slapping him on the back. "That is my boy!" my father shouted. "Look at this bloodline." I looked at the timestamp. They had gone live exactly at 9:30 in the morning, the exact minute I was ringing the opening bell. It was not an accident. It was a statement. They did not just skip my moment. They actively chose to ignore it to celebrate a dog. I threw the phone onto the seat next to me. A hot tear escaped, tracking down my cheek, ruining the professional makeup I had paid $500 for. I wiped it away angrily. I was done crying for them. I was done begging for scraps of their attention. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, the city I had conquered, while they played house in the suburbs. If they wanted to pretend I did not exist, fine. I would be the ghost they feared. Just then my phone buzzed against the leather seat. A text message. Finally. I picked it up, expecting an apology. Maybe they saw the news. Maybe someone called them and asked why they were not on TV. The sender was Dad. I opened the message. There were no congratulations, no emojis, no mention of the IPO or the stock price, just a demand. Family dinner at 7 p.m. Important discussion. Do not be late like usual. And Sophia, please dress casually. Do not wear those stiff suits of yours. You look unapproachable. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Important discussion. In the language of the Brooks family, important discussion meant only one thing. They needed money. They did not care that I had just made history. They cared that my bank account was now open for business. My father wanted me to come, but he wanted me to diminish myself. Dress casually. Be small. Do not remind us that you are the CEO. Just be the daughter who writes the checks. I typed out a refusal. I am busy. I am tired. I have a board meeting. But then I stopped. I deleted the draft. A cold, sharp anger replaced the sadness in my chest. If I didn't go, they would spin the narrative. They would tell everyone I was the arrogant, ungrateful daughter who abandoned them. They would play the victim, and Keisha would cry about it on her next live stream. No. I needed to end this. I needed to close this chapter, not with a text, but with a period. Driver. I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing its trembling warmth. Change of plans. Stop at the office first. I need to pick up a file from my safe. The driver nodded, catching my eyes in the rearview mirror. He saw the shift. He saw the moment the grieving daughter died, and the ruthless CEO took over. I looked at my father's text one last time. Important discussion. Oh, it would be important, all right. I was going to bring something to the table that would ruin their appetites forever. I put the phone away and fixed my posture. The crying was over. The audit was about to begin. To understand why I walked into that dinner with a nuclear weapon in a manila folder, you have to understand the specific flavor of humiliation my father preferred. He did not just say no to you, he made you beg, and then he made you wish he had refused. As my driver navigated the chaotic streets of Manhattan toward my office to retrieve the file, my mind drifted back 10 years. The leather seats of the Bentley faded away, replaced by the cold, hard linoleum of my parents' kitchen in Philadelphia. It was the summer of 2014. The air in the kitchen always smelled of lemon polish and simmering resentment. I had just graduated from Howard University magna cum laude. I was 22, full of fire, holding a business plan that was wrinkled from me gripping it too tight. I stood across the granite island from my father, Byron. He was polishing his golf clubs, a rhythmic, dismissive sound that filled the silence. My mother, Viola, was at the stove, pretending to stir a pot of greens, but listening to every word. And Keisha, my 19-year-old sister, was sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone, smirking before I even opened my mouth. Dad. I started, my voice trembling slightly. I need $5,000 just to buy the first truck and secure the permit. I have the contracts lined up. I have the route planned. I can pay you back in 6 months with 10% interest. Byron stopped polishing. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes scanning me with a look of profound disappointment. He did not look at the business plan. He looked at my work boots. He looked at my braided hair. He looked at the grease stain on my shirt from where I had been inspecting a junkyard earlier that day. Let me get this straight, Sophia, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I spent $50,000 sending you to Howard, the Mecca, a place for doctors, lawyers, and politicians. And you come back to my house looking like a field hand asking me to fund a garbage route. It is not garbage, Dad. I pleaded, placing the plan on the counter. It is logistics. It is recycling supply chain management. We take food waste from restaurants and divert it to compost facilities before it hits the landfill. It is green energy. It is the future. It is trash, he spat back, slamming the rag onto the counter. You are a glorified trash collector. Do you know how embarrassing it is? Deacon Thomas asked me yesterday what my brilliant daughter is doing. I had to lie. I had to tell him you are consulting. I could not tell him you are driving a truck full of rotting vegetables. My mother chimed in from the stove, not turning around. She just wants attention, Byron. She knows Keisha is dating a pre-med student, so she has to do something dramatic to stand out, even if it is smelling like a dumpster. Keisha giggled. It was a sharp, cruel sound. Imagine dating Sophia, she said without looking up. You go in for a kiss and she smells like old cabbage. Gross. I felt the tears pricking my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I could not afford to cry. I needed that money. I had maxed out my credit cards. I had sold my car. This 5,000 was the bridge between failure and survival. Dad, please, I whispered, hating myself for the desperation in my voice. I believe in this. I just need a chance. I will never ask you for anything again. Byron stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I knew what was inside. It was the cash he had withdrawn that morning for a new set of custom titanium golf clubs. He had been bragging about them for weeks. He looked at the envelope, then looked at me with a sneer. You want this money? He asked. Yes, I said. He did not hand it to me. He threw it. The envelope hit the floor with a heavy thud, sliding across the linoleum until it stopped at my dirty boots. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. My mother stopped stirring. Keisha stopped scrolling. Pick it up, Byron commanded. I froze. My dignity screamed at me to walk away, to leave the money and the house and never look back. But then I thought about my business. I thought about the vision I had. I realized in that moment that pride does not pay the bills. Success does. Slowly, painfully, I bent my knees. I lowered myself to the floor in front of my father. I reached out and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy like a brick. There, Byron said, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. That is where you belong, scrounging on the floor. But he was not done. As I stood up, clutching the money to my chest, he opened a drawer and pulled out a piece of notepad paper and a pen. He slammed them onto the counter. I am not a fool, Sophia, he said. I know you will fail. And I do not want you coming back here in 6 months claiming this was a loan or that you owe me equity. I want a tax write-off, not a bad debt. He pointed at the paper. Write this down. I took the pen, my hand shaking. What do you want me to write? Write that this $5,000 is a charitable gift from Byron Brooks to his indigent daughter, Sophia Brooks. Write that it is for humanitarian aid. Write that there is no expectation of repayment and no exchange of goods or services. Write that you are a charity case. My blood ran cold. He wanted to declare me as a charity case to the IRS. He wanted to use his own daughter's desperation to save himself a few $100s on his tax bill. Mom, are you hearing this? I asked, looking at Viola. She turned around, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was hard, cold stone. Just sign it, Sophia. Stop making a scene. You are lucky he is giving you anything at all after you embarrassed us. Keisha, honey, do not look at your sister. You do not want to end up like that. I looked at them, really looked at them. In that moment, the bond of family snapped. It did not break, it dissolved. I realized they did not love me. They loved the idea of me that reflected well on them. And since I did not fit that image, I was useful only as a tax deduction. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote every word he dictated. Charitable gift, indigent daughter, no expectation of repayment. I signed my name at the bottom. The ink was dark and permanent. Byron snatched the paper from me, blowing on the ink to dry it. He folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket. Now get out, he said, turning back to his golf clubs, and take a shower. You stink of failure. I walked out of that house with $5,000 in my pocket and a hole in my heart where my family used to be. I climbed into my rented moving truck, and as I turned the ignition, I made a vow. I swore that I would take every single cent of this money and multiply it until I could buy and sell their entire world. I swore that one day, that piece of paper he just put in his pocket would come back to haunt him. Back in the present, the Bentley came to a smooth stop in front of my office building. I opened my eyes. The memory faded, but the rage remained. It was a cold, focused rage. I walked into the lobby, my heels clicking against the marble floor, echoing like gunshots. I went straight to the private safe in my office. My hands did not shake as I spun the dial. I pulled out the file marked Taxes 2015. Inside was the photocopy of that handwritten note and my father's tax return where he had proudly claimed the deduction. I ran my thumb over the signature. Indigent daughter. I am not indigent anymore, Dad, I whispered to the empty room. I put the file in my bag. Tonight was not just dinner. It was an audit. And I was the auditor. I checked my reflection in the glass. The crying girl from 10 years ago was gone. The CEO was here, and she was hungry. The drive from my office in Manhattan to my parents' house in the suburbs of Philadelphia usually took about 45 minutes, but today it felt like crossing into a different dimension. I watched the skyline fade in my rearview mirror, the steel and glass monuments to ambition replaced by the sagging porches and manicured lawns of the neighborhood where I grew up. My driver navigated the Bentley Flying Spur through the familiar streets. This car was a masterpiece of engineering, a $300,000 sanctuary of hand-stitched leather and silence. It was the only place I felt safe. As we turned onto Maple Street, I saw the house. It was a modest two-story colonial that I had paid off for them 5 years ago. I paid the mortgage, the property taxes, and the landscaping bills, yet I was treated like a tenant who was late on rent. My stomach tightened, not with nerves, but with the cold anticipation of a soldier entering enemy territory. My driver slowed down, preparing to pull into the long driveway. But before he could turn the wheel, a figure stepped out from the garage, blocking the path. It was Greg, my brother-in-law. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight around the middle and holding a beer bottle like it was a scepter. He waved his arms frantically, signaling us to stop. My driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, confused. I sighed. "Roll down the window, please." The glass slid down silently. Greg sauntered over, a smug grin plastered on his face. He leaned down, resting his arm on the door of my pristine car, leaving a smudge of condensation from his beer. "Whoa there, Sophia," he said, his voice loud and performative. "Where do you think you are going?" "I am coming to dinner, Greg," I said, keeping my voice level. "Move out of the way." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Cannot do that. The driveway is reserved for VIPs tonight. We have important guests coming. The pastor, your aunts. We need the space close to the door for them. You will have to park on the street." I stared at him. Behind him, I could see his leased BMW 3 Series parked diagonally, taking up 2 spots. Next to it was Keisha's rusted SUV. There was plenty of room. "Greg," I said slowly, "my car is worth more than this entire zip code. I am not parking it on the street under that oak tree that drops sap." He shrugged, taking a sip of his beer. "House rules, Sophia. Dad said VIP parking only. Since you are just family, you can walk a few extra steps. It will be good for you. You spend too much time sitting in offices anyway." I looked at his face. The pettiness was breathtaking. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed making the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company park on the street like a delivery driver. He wanted to exert power because in the real world, he had none. "Fine," I said. I signaled my driver to back up. We parked 3 houses down under a flickering street lamp. As I stepped out of the car, clutching the manila folder with the tax returns against my chest, I told my driver to go grab dinner and come back in 2 hours. I smoothed down my suit and began the long walk to the front door. The evening air was humid and sticky. By the time I reached the porch, I could hear laughter coming from inside. They were already celebrating. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The smell hit me first. Pot roast and cheap perfume. The foyer was crowded with coats. Standing in the living room archway was my mother, Viola. She was holding a glass of champagne, looking flustered and excited. When she saw me, her smile faltered just for a second before she rearranged her face into a mask of maternal criticism. "You are late," she said instead of hello. "I am on time, Mom. It is exactly 7. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as they swept over my outfit. I was wearing a charcoal gray Loro Piana suit. It was cashmere tailored to perfection, costing more than her wedding ring. It whispered power and elegance. To my mother, however, it screamed rejection of her ideals. "Sophia," she sighed, shaking her head, "we are having a celebration. Could you not have worn something nicer?" "This is nice, Mom. It looks like a man's suit," she said, reaching out to pick a piece of invisible lint off my shoulder. "Look at Keisha. She knows how to dress like a lady." I looked past her. Keisha was lounging on the sofa wearing a neon pink dress from Fashion Nova that was 2 sizes too small. It was flashy, revealing, and covered in sequins that caught the light aggressively. She looked like a reality TV star wannabe. "Keisha looks festive," I said diplomatically. "She looks happy," Viola corrected me. "She looks like a woman who has a husband to dress for." "You look like you are going to a funeral. Or a court hearing." I tightened my grip on the folder. "A court hearing is closer than you think, Mom," I thought to myself. I walked past her into the living room. The television was on, mounted above the fireplace. It was tuned to CNBC. My heart skipped a beat. The anchor was speaking excitedly, and a graphic with my face on it was displayed on the screen. The headline read, "Greenstream Logistics Smashes, IPO Expectations. Valuation hits $325 million. For a split second, I thought maybe they were watching it. Maybe they were waiting for me to walk in so they could cheer. Maybe I had misjudged them. My father Byron was sitting in his recliner, the throne from which he judged the world. He was holding the remote. He looked at the screen where my face was beaming in high definition. Then he looked at me standing in the doorway. There was no pride in his eyes, only annoyance. "Too much noise," he grumbled. He pointed the remote at the TV and pressed the power button. The screen went black. My face vanished. The headline vanished. The proof of my life's work was extinguished with a single click. "Dad," I said, my voice tight. "That was me. That was the news about my company." "I know what it was, Sophia," he said dismissively, setting the remote down. "But we are not here to talk about work. We are here to talk about family. And you are interrupting Greg's story." He turned his attention to Greg, who had just walked in from the garage and was now standing by the fireplace, chest puffed out. "Go on, son," Byron said, his voice dripping with the warmth he never showed me. "You were telling us about the promotion." Greg smirked at me before addressing the room. "Yeah, so like I was saying, the regional manager called me into his office today. He said, 'Greg, we like your hustle. We are bumping you up to Senior Assistant Manager of Claims Processing. It comes with a new title and a $2,000 raise. The room erupted. My mother clapped her hands together. Keisha squealed and ran over to kiss Greg on the cheek. My father nodded approvingly, looking at Greg like he had just conquered a nation. That is a real job, Byron said loudly, casting a side eye at me. Stable, secure. Not like that gambling you do on the stock market, Sophia. Greg is building a career. I stood there frozen. A $2,000 raise. That was what they were celebrating. I had made $325 million today. I had changed the industry. I had made history. And they turned off the TV to applaud a man who got a title bump at an insurance firm. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. But it wasn't funny. It was a deliberate calculation. They knew exactly what they were doing. By ignoring my success, they were trying to starve me of my worth. They wanted me to feel small so that when they asked for money later, I would give it to them, just to prove I was valuable. Viola's voice cut through the applause. Come on everyone, dinner is ready. Sophia, try not to talk about business at the table. We do not want to bore Greg. He has had a big day. I followed them into the dining room. I watched them fawn over Greg, watched my mother heap extra roast onto his plate. I sat at the end of the table, the spot usually reserved for children or unwanted guests. I placed the manila folder on my lap, hidden by the tablecloth. Enjoy it while you can, I thought as I watched Greg gloat. Enjoy the roast, enjoy the praise, because by the time dessert comes around, you are going to wish you had stayed in the garage. The lion's den wasn't this dining room. The lion was sitting right here in the cashmere suit, and she was ready to bite. The roast beef was dry, overcooked to the point of turning into leather, but I chewed it methodically. I needed something to bite down on to keep from screaming. The dining room was suffocatingly warm, and the air was thick with the smell of gravy and self-righteousness. I sat at the far end of the table, watching my family perform their version of happiness. My father, Byron, was at the head of the table, beaming at Greg like he was the prodigal son. My mother, Viola, was fussing over Greg's wine glass, filling it to the brim while mine remained empty. And then there was Greg himself, the man of the hour, the senior assistant manager of claims processing. He sat there loosening his tie, his face flushed with the cheap Merlot my father had bought in bulk. He looked at me, his eyes glassy and condescending. So Sophia, Greg started leaning back in his chair and picking his teeth with a fingernail. I was looking at your little company's website earlier. Greenstream, right? Dealing with garbage. It is logistics, Greg, I corrected him quietly, keeping my eyes on my plate. We optimize supply chains to reduce food waste. Right, garbage. Greg waved his hand dismissively. Listen, I know you think you have hit the big time with this IPO thing, but I have been in the corporate world a lot longer than you. I deal with risk assessment every day. And I have got to tell you, I am worried about your scalability. I paused my fork halfway to my mouth. I looked up at him. Here was a man who managed a team of 3 people in a windowless office trying to lecture me on scaling a multinational corporation. Is that so? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. What exactly are you worried about? Well, Greg said, puffing out his chest, it is your cash flow. You are expanding too fast. In the insurance game, we call it over-leveraging. You are going to have liquidity issues if you keep buying all those electric trucks. You need to focus on your net profit margin before you worry about market share. You are bleeding capital just to look green. It is rookie stuff, really. The table went silent. My father nodded solemnly, as if Greg had just delivered a sermon from the Mount. My mother looked at me, expecting me to take notes. I set my fork down. The metal clinked sharply against the china. Actually, Greg, I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the room like a scalpel. You are confusing cash flow with capital expenditure. The trucks are assets, not liabilities. We amortize them over 10 years, which actually gives us a significant tax advantage. And as for liquidity, we just raised $300 million in the public market. We have enough cash on hand to buy your entire insurance firm 6 times over and still have money left for lunch. It is called EBITDA Greg. Earnings before interest taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Maybe you should look it up before you try to give financial advice to a CEO. The silence that followed was not respectful, it was stunned. Greg's face turned a deep shade of crimson. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at my father for backup. My mother slammed her hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. Sophia Viola hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. "Do not be so rude. I am not being rude." "Mom," I said, "I am being accurate." He is using terms he does not understand to critique a business he knows nothing about. He is a manager. "Sophia," my mother snapped. "He knows what he is talking about. You always have to be the smartest person in the room, don't you? You always have to make men feel small. It is ugly, Sophia. It is why you are still single. A woman should know when to listen and let a man lead the conversation. You are embarrassing yourself trying to act like a know-it-all." I felt the blood rushing to my ears. I was the one embarrassing myself. I had built an empire from nothing. I had just rung the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And here I was being told to shut up and listen to a man who probably needed a calculator to figure out a 15% tip. Keisha, sensing the tension and wanting to twist the knife, leaned forward. She reached under her chair and pulled out a handbag, placing it heavily on the table. It was a beige shoulder bag covered in the interlocking G logo of Gucci. She patted it affectionately, making sure the gold hardware caught the light from the chandelier. "Mom is right, Sophia," Keisha said, her voice sugary sweet, but laced with venom. "You are so obsessed with your little business numbers, you forget what is really important in life. Look at this. Greg bought this for me to celebrate his promotion." She pushed the bag toward the center of the table. "It is a Gucci Marmont," she announced proudly. "Real Italian leather. $2,000. Greg said I deserve the best because I support him. That is what a real man does, Sophia. He provides. He buys his wife luxury. He does not ask her to work in a landfill." I looked at the bag. I looked at it with the trained eye of a woman who owned closets full of authentic vintage couture. I saw the stitching on the strap, which was slightly uneven. I saw the gold finish on the logo, which was a shade too yellow, too brassy. I saw the lining peeking out from the zipper, which was a cheap polyester blend instead of the microfiber suede Gucci used. It was a fake. A good fake, maybe a Canal Street special, but a fake nonetheless. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his seat, taking a large gulp of wine. He knew, I knew. "It is beautiful," Keisha, my mother cooed, reaching out to stroke the bag. "See, Sophia, this is what success looks like. A husband who spoils you. Not some lonely apartment and a bank account full of virtual money." "Virtual money." Keisha laughed, echoing her. "Exactly. Your stocks are just numbers on a screen, Sophia. They could disappear tomorrow. This bag is real. This is an investment. Greg is building a legacy for us." "What are you building besides a pile of trash?" I looked at Keisha's smug face. I looked at the fake bag sitting on the stained tablecloth. I looked at Greg, who was avoiding my gaze. They were so proud of their illusion. They measured their worth in counterfeit goods and hollow titles. I reached for my wine glass, which was still empty. I picked up the bottle of cheap red wine from the center of the table and poured myself a glass, filling it to the rim. "You are right, Keisha," I said, taking a slow sip, the vinegar taste coating my tongue. "That is a very impressive bag. It must have cost Greg a fortune. It is amazing what you can buy when you are a senior assistant manager." I saw Greg's shoulders relax. He thought I had surrendered. He thought I had accepted the lie. He did not know that I was just biding my time. I was letting them stack their house of cards higher and higher so that when I finally pulled the table out from under them, the crash would be spectacular. My father cleared his throat, bringing the attention back to himself. "Now that we have settled that," he said, his voice booming, "let us get to the reason I called you all here. As Greg pointed out with his financial expertise, the family needs to think about the future. And Sophia, since you have had some luck with this IPO of yours, it is time we discuss your contribution. I set my glass down. My hand brushed against the manila folder in my lap. The texture of the paper was rough against my fingertips. Contribution, I repeated. Yes, Byron said, leaning forward. We are family, and family shares the harvest. Greg and Keisha have plans. Your mother and I have needs, and you, well, you have plenty. The air in the room shifted. The pretense of a social dinner evaporated. The sharks began to circle. They did not want my company. They did not want my expertise. They did not even want my presence. They just wanted to bleed me dry. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. I am glad you brought that up, Dad, I said, sliding my hand under the napkin gripping the folder. Because I brought something for you too, a contribution, you might say. I watched their eyes light up. They thought it was a check. They thought I had brought a checkbook to write away their debts and fund their fantasies. My mother actually licked her lips. Go on, Sophia. Byron said, his greed naked on his face. Put it on the table. Not yet, I said. First, I want to hear the number. How much do you think you are entitled to? Greg pulled out a calculator from his pocket. He had come prepared. He started punching in numbers, the clicking sound echoing in the silent room. Well, looking at your valuation and factoring in the initial seed money Dad provided, plus interest and emotional damages for the years you were distant. He looked up, a triumphant grin on his face. We figure 40% is fair. That is roughly $130 million. I did not blink. $130 million. For $5,000 of charity money. I looked at my father. Is that the number you want, Dad? Byron nodded. It is only fair, Sophia. I made you. I invested in you when no one else would. Now it is time to pay the piper. I nodded slowly. I reached under the table and lifted the folder. Okay, I said. Let us talk about that investment. My father reached into the inner pocket of his dinner jacket with the slow, deliberate movement of a magician preparing for his final trick. The room went silent. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. He withdrew a piece of paper that was folded into a small, tight square. It was yellowed with age, the edges fraying slightly. He placed it in the center of the table next to the centerpiece of plastic flowers and smoothed it out with his large, calloused hand. I recognized it immediately. I did not need to lean forward to see the jagged handwriting or the grease stain on the corner. It was the note. The note I had signed on my knees on the kitchen floor 10 years ago. The note that declared me a charity case. But as my father looked at it now, he did not see a receipt for a tax deduction. He saw a lottery ticket. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. You remember this, Sophia? He asked, his voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. I remember, I said, my eyes fixed on the paper. Good, he said, because I think we have had a misunderstanding about what this document represents. You see, 10 years ago, when you came to me begging for money, I did not just give you cash. I gave you a lifeline. I gave you seed capital. In the business world, they call that being an angel investor. He paused to let the buzzword sink in. He had probably learned it from Greg 10 minutes before I arrived. I took a risk on you, he continued, gesturing grandly. A massive risk. $5,000 was a lot of money to us back then. I could have bought those golf clubs. I could have taken your mother on a cruise. But I chose to invest in your vision. I chose to support my daughter. And now that the investment has matured, it is time to discuss the return on investment. Greg, who had been waiting for his cue, jumped in. He pulled a sleek, expensive calculator out of his pocket and set it on the table next to the note. He tapped the keys furiously. His brow furrowed in concentration as if he were calculating the trajectory of a rocket ship rather than orchestrating a robbery. Exactly, Greg said, not looking up. I have been crunching the numbers, Sophia, and we have to look at this fairly. Byron was the first money in. In Silicon Valley terms, that is the pre-seed round. That equity is the most expensive because the risk of failure is practically 100%. He looked up at me, a smug grin plastered on his face. Now, normally an early investor like that would get a significant chunk of the company. Greg explained, his voice taking on that mansplaining tone again. Plus, we have to factor in inflation. We have to factor in the opportunity cost of that $5,000 over a decade. And most importantly, we have to factor in the emotional support fee. The family brand. The fact that you are a Brooks. That name opens doors, Sophia. I stared at him. The name Brooks had opened exactly 0 doors for me. In fact, I had spent the first 3 years of my business trying to distance myself from my father's reputation as a hardliner at the post office. So Greg continued, his fingers flying over the calculator buttons. Based on your valuation of $325 million and applying a standard venture capital multiplier for a founding investor plus accrued interest. He hit the equals button with a dramatic flourish. We believe a 40% stake is fair. The number hung in the air. 40%. I did the math in my head instantly. 40% of $325 million. $130 million, I whispered. Greg nodded enthusiastically. Give or take a few thousand. But let us call it around 130. It is a fair price, Sophia. It leaves you with the majority control. You still get to be the boss. But your family gets their rightful share of the pie. My mother gasped. She brought her hand to her chest, her eyes wide and glittering with greed. $130 million. She whispered the words like a prayer. Think of what we could do with that, Viola, Keisha said, grabbing her mother's hand. We could buy that estate in the Hamptons, the one with the private beach. I could finally launch my lifestyle brand properly. No more fake bags. I could have a real atelier in Paris. And the church, my father added, his eyes looking toward the ceiling. I could build a new wing for the church. The Byron Brooks Community Center. Think of the legacy, Sophia. They were already spending it. They were already living in the mansion, driving the cars, cutting the ribbons. They had completely bypassed reality and moved straight into a fantasy where my hard work was their winning lottery number. I looked at them. I looked at their eager, hungry faces. I looked at the yellowed piece of paper on the table. And then I felt something bubbling up in my chest. It started as a low rumble, a vibration in my diaphragm. It moved up my throat, hot and uncontrollable. I started to laugh. It was not a polite laugh. It was not a chuckle. It was a loud, harsh barking sound that erupted from me with violence. I threw my head back and laughed until my ribs ached. I laughed until tears squeezed out of the corners of my eyes. It was the laughter of someone who had stared into the abyss of human absurdity and found it hilarious. The room went dead silent. My father's smile vanished. Greg stopped tapping on his calculator. My mother looked terrified. Sophia, Viola said, her voice trembling. What is so funny? I gasped for air, wiping a tear from my cheek. I looked at them, shaking my head. You, I gasped. You are funny. This whole scene is funny. I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the table. I leaned forward, looming over the dinner plates and the fake Gucci bag and the yellowed note. $130 million. I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You think you are entitled to $130 million because you threw $5,000 at me to make me go away. It was an investment, my father stammered, losing his confidence. It was hush money, I snapped, slamming my hand down on the table. You told me I stank of failure. You told me to write that I was a charity case so you could save money on your taxes. You did not believe in me. You bet against me. And now that I have won, you want to cash in a ticket you threw in the trash. I picked up the yellowed note. You call this an angel investment, I asked. I call it a receipt for my dignity. I sold my pride for this money. I crawled for this money. And you think that gives you the right to 40% of my life? I looked at Greg. And you, Mr. Senior Assistant Manager. Do you know what dilution is? Do you know what a cap table is? You think you can just multiply 5,000 by a magic number and get 9 figures? You are not a businessman, Greg. You are a clown with a calculator. Greg's face turned purple. Now see here, Sophia, you cannot talk to me like that. I said, cutting him off. I can talk to you however I want, because I am the one with the real bank account. I am the one who built something real. And you are all just sitting here hallucinating. Are you crazy? I asked, looking around the table. Are you actually clinically insane? Do you think any court in this country would look at this scrap of paper and award you $100 million? My father stood up, his face red with rage. It is a verbal contract, Sophia, he shouted. And we have witnesses. Your mother was there. Keisha was there. We will testify. We will drag you into court and tell the world what an ungrateful wretch you are. We will ruin your reputation. We will tell everyone you stole from your own father. So that is it, I said calmly. Extortion. You are threatening me. I am promising you, my father spat. You pay us or we destroy you. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man who was supposed to protect me. There was no love in his eyes, only greed and desperation. He was willing to burn my life to the ground to keep himself warm. I reached for the manila folder again. Okay, I said, my voice turning icy. You want to talk about courts. You want to talk about testimony. You want to talk about paper trails. I opened the folder. Let us talk about the IRS. The mention of the IRS hung in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle, but my father did not flinch. He was a man who had spent 30 years spinning narratives from a pulpit, and he knew how to pivot when the facts were not on his side. He slowly took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he looked up, his eyes were not filled with fear, but with a disappointed pity. He looked at me like I was a lost sheep who had wandered too far from the flock. You are talking about laws. Sophia, my father said, his voice taking on the deep, resonant cadence he reserved for Sunday mornings. You are talking about tax codes and government agencies. But those are man-made laws. In this house, we follow a higher law. He reached out and placed his hand over the yellowed note on the table as if he were blessing it. The Bible says, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." Do you remember that verse, Sophia? We taught it to you before you could walk. I gripped the edge of the table. I knew this tactic. When logic failed, he weaponized God. I remember, Dad, I said quietly. But I also remember the verse about not provoking your children to wrath. Byron ignored me. He closed his eyes, swaying slightly in his chair. We sacrificed for you. We poured our spirit into you. That $5,000 was not just money. It was a seed. We planted a seed in faith, believing that God would multiply it. And He has. He has blessed you with abundance. But now you want to hoard the harvest. You want to lock the barn doors and let your own kin starve. That is a sin, Sophia. That is the sin of greed. My mother Viola took her cue perfectly. She let out a small choked sob and brought a handkerchief to her face. She dabbed at eyes that I noticed were perfectly dry. After everything we did, she whispered, her voice trembling. I carried you for 9 months, Sophia. I went through labor for you. I fed you. I clothed you. Do you know how many times I went without a new dress so you could have school supplies? Do you know how many times your father worked overtime just to keep the lights on? I watched her performance with a detachment that frightened me. I remembered my childhood differently. I remembered making my own peanut butter sandwiches for dinner while they went out to eat with Keisha. I remembered wearing Keisha's hand-me-downs even though she was 3 years younger than me, because Mom bought her new clothes every season. I remembered working double shifts at a diner when I was 16 to pay for my own SAT prep courses, because Dad said he didn't have the money. You did not support me, Mom, I said, my voice flat. I moved out the day I turned 18. I paid for my own college. I paid for my own apartment. I have sent you checks every month for the last 5 years. I paid off this house. That is just money, Viola snapped, dropping the handkerchief. Money is easy for you. But what about love? What about respect? You come in here with your expensive suit and your cold eyes, and you treat us like employees. You have lost your way, Sophia. You have let the devil of ambition take your soul. Greg nodded solemnly, taking a sip of his wine. Amen, Viola. Family is about taking care of each other. If I had your kind of money, I would not make my parents beg. I would give them the world. I looked at Greg, the man who was currently living rent-free in my parents' basement while they pretended he was a successful executive. The guilt trip was failing, so they decided to switch tactics. The air in the room shifted from mournful to menacing. Keisha cleared her throat. She picked up her phone, tapping her long acrylic nails against the screen. The sound was like a ticking clock. You know, Sophia, Keisha said, her voice casual but her eyes hard. It would be a shame if people found out what kind of person you really are. What is that supposed to mean? I asked. Keisha shrugged, examining her manicure. I have almost 500,000 followers on Instagram now. My engagement rate is through the roof. People listen to me, they trust me. They look at our family and they see perfection. But the internet loves a villain. She turned her phone around to face me. The screen showed her Instagram profile. The media is eating up your success story right now, Keisha continued. The self-made black woman, the green tech pioneer. But you know what the media loves more than a hero? A hypocrite. Imagine the headlines if I posted a video tonight, crying my eyes out, telling the world how the great Sophia Brooks let her elderly parents lose their home while she flew around in private jets. She paused, letting the threat sink in. I could write a very compelling caption, Sophia. I could talk about how you abandoned us, how you refused to help Dad with his medical bills. I could even make up some medical bills. Who is going to check? The internet does not fact-check. They just cancel. My blood ran cold. This was not just manipulation. This was blackmail. You would lie about me, I asked. You would destroy my reputation to get money. I would tell my truth, Keisha said, smiling sweetly. And my truth is that you are selfish. Greenstream stock is fragile, Sophia. One bad news cycle, one viral video of your crying mother, and your valuation could drop 20% overnight. The board of directors would not like that. They might even ask you to step down. Greg leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Think about it, Sophia, he said, his voice low. Is it really worth the risk? 40% is a lot, but it is better than zero. If Keisha posts that video, you could lose everything. The company, the reputation, the legacy. We are just offering you a way out, an insurance policy. I looked around the table. My father, the holy man, justifying theft with scripture. My mother, the martyr, weaponizing her womb. My sister, the influencer, holding my career hostage with a smartphone. And Greg, the parasite, orchestrating the whole thing. They were not my family. They were a syndicate. And they thought they had me cornered. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed I had something to lose that I valued more than my freedom. They assumed I cared about the opinions of strangers more than I cared about my own self-respect. I slowly picked up my napkin from my lap. I folded it neatly into a square, pressing the creases down with my thumb. You are right, Keisha, I said, standing up. The internet does love a villain. I picked up the manila folder. But you forgot one thing about the internet. It also loves receipts. I looked at my father. You want to talk about God, Dad? God sees everything, including that tax return. I looked at my mother. You want to talk about sacrifice, Mom? Get ready to sacrifice this house because without my checks, the bank is going to take it back in 3 months. I looked at Keisha. And you? Go ahead, post the video, cry your fake tears. But remember that defamation is a lawsuit. And unlike you, I can afford the best lawyers in the country. I will not just sue you, Keisha. I will bankrupt you. I will take every fake bag, every follower, and every cent you ever make for the rest of your life. I dropped the napkin onto the table. It landed on top of the yellowed note, covering my signature. Try it, I whispered. See who dies first. I turned my back on them. I heard my mother gasp. I heard my father start to shout something about hellfire. I heard Greg pushing his chair back. But I did not stop. I walked out of the dining room through the foyer that smelled of pot roast and lies, and out the front door. The night air was cool and clean. I walked down the driveway past the spot where Greg had blocked my car. My driver was waiting down the street, the headlights of the Bentley cutting through the darkness. As I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Keisha had started a live video. I paused, my hand hovering over the handle. I could leave. I could drive away and let them scream into the void. Or I could end this, once and for all. I opened the car door and slid into the back seat. Take me back to the city, I told the driver. Then I unlocked my phone. I opened the folder. I took a picture of the tax return. And then I opened my own social media. I had never used it for personal drama. My account was strictly business. But tonight business was personal. If they wanted a war, I would give them a revolution. The silence inside the Bentley was supposed to be a sanctuary, but as the heavy iron gates of my parents' driveway faded into the distance, that silence was shattered by the relentless vibration of my phone. It buzzed against the leather seat like an angry hornet. I looked down. The screen was lit up with notifications, but one stood out above the rest. It was a push notification from Instagram. Keisha Brooks is live. Caption: The truth about my sister. My stomach dropped. I knew they were desperate, but I did not think they would move this fast. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear but from a cold, rising fury. I tapped the screen. The video loaded instantly. The connection was crisp. Keisha was sitting in her old bedroom, the one with the pink walls she had refused to repaint since high school. The lighting was dim, intentionally dramatic. She was crying. Or rather, she was performing the act of crying. Her mascara was artfully smeared beneath her eyes, and her breathing was ragged and shallow. "Hey guys," she whispered into the camera, her voice trembling. "I did not want to do this. I really didn't. You know I try to keep my page positive. I try to be a light. But tonight something happened that I just cannot stay silent about." She paused, wiping a tear that managed to fall perfectly down the center of her cheek. The viewer count in the corner of the screen was climbing rapidly. 500, 2,000, 5,000. People love a train wreck, and Keisha was giving them a front row seat. "You all know my sister Sophia," Keisha continued, sniffing loudly. "You see her on the news. You see her ringing the bell at the stock exchange. You see the suits and the cars and the billions of dollars. But you do not see what happens behind closed doors. You do not see how she treats the people who made her who she is." I watched in horror as my mother Viola appeared in the frame. She was sitting on the edge of the bed behind Keisha, holding a tissue to her nose. She looked frail. She looked broken. It was an Oscar-worthy performance from a woman who 30 minutes ago was demanding a multi-million-dollar estate in the Hamptons. "Tonight," Keisha said, her voice breaking. "Tonight Sophia came over for dinner. We just wanted to celebrate her. We wanted to hug her. But she was so angry. She started screaming at Dad about money, about how we were parasites. And when Mom tried to calm her down..." Keisha stopped, covering her mouth with her hand. The comments section was scrolling so fast, it was a blur of angry emojis and capitalized text. "She pushed her," Keisha sobbed. "My billionaire sister pushed our 60-year-old mother into the wall. Because Mom asked her for help. Because Dad needs surgery, and Sophia refused to pay for it. She said she would rather see us on the street than give us a dime of her precious money." I gasped aloud in the quiet of the car. It was a lie so bold, so malicious that it took my breath away. I had never touched my mother. I had walked away. But the truth did not matter to the 10,000 people now watching the stream. To them, I was a monster. I was the greedy, heartless villain who assaulted her own mother over money. The comments were turning vicious. Cancel Green Stream. Boycott her company. She belongs in jail. Monster. Ungrateful. Eat the rich. My phone started ringing. It was not a notification this time. It was a call. Marcus, my CFO. I stared at the screen. I could not answer. What could I say? How do you explain to your chief financial officer that your sister is currently accusing you of elder abuse on social media because you refuse to be extorted? The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Then a text from my publicist. Sophia, we have a problem. TMZ just picked up Keisha's stream. Call me now. Then a text from a board member. Sophia, what is going on? My wife just showed me a video. Is this true? I felt the walls closing in. The car felt like a cage. I looked at Keisha's face on the screen. She was gaining followers by the second. She was monetizing my destruction. Every tear she shed was a deposit in her bank account and a withdrawal from mine. I clicked on the stock ticker app on my phone. Greenstream had closed at a record high, but in the after-hours trading market the line was nosediving. Down 1%, down 2%, down 3%. That was nearly $10 million of market capitalization evaporated in the time it took me to drive 3 blocks. $10 million gone because Keisha wanted a Gucci bag and my father wanted to be a big shot. I put the phone down on the seat face down. I could not watch anymore. I looked out the window at the passing city lights. They blurred into streaks of gold and red. I realized then with a clarity that cut deeper than any knife that this was not a family dispute. This was an assassination attempt. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that my reputation was my currency. They knew that as a Black woman CEO I was already under a microscope. I had to be perfect. I had to be unimpeachable. One crack in the armor and the world would tear me apart. They were counting on that. They were counting on the fact that the board would panic, that the investors would flee, that I would be so terrified of losing my company that I would write the check just to make it stop. They did not want to love me. They did not even want to be in my life. They wanted to harvest me. To them, I was not a person. I was a crop. And since I refused to be harvested willingly, they were burning the field. My phone rang again. It was Marcus again. I took a deep breath. I picked up the phone. I had to be the CEO now. The daughter was dead. She died the moment Keisha pressed the live button. Marcus, I said, my voice steady, though my hand was shaking. Sophia, he sounded panicked. It is a bloodbath. The stock is tanking. We have reporters calling the main line. The hashtag boycott Greenstream is trending on Twitter. You need to issue a statement. You need to deny this. No, Marcus, I said. No statement. Not yet. Sophia. You cannot be silent, he argued. Silence looks like guilt. If you do not say anything, people will believe her. She has bruises, Sophia. She showed a bruise on your mother's arm. I closed my eyes. A bruise. My mother bruised easily. She probably bumped into a doorframe yesterday, or maybe she did it to herself. The thought made me sick. Marcus, listen to me, I said sharply. Do not post anything. Do not engage with the press. If we fight this in the media, we lose. It becomes a he said, she said, and she has the tears. We need to fight this with facts. What facts? Marcus asked. She has a video. I have an audit, I whispered. I have the truth, Marcus. And I have the best lawyers in New York. Call the legal team. Wake them up. Get them to the office. I am 10 minutes away. We are not issuing a press release. We are filing a lawsuit. And Marcus, yes, Sophia. Freeze their assets. My parents' house. The one I paid for. Check the deed. It is still in my name, technically held in the family trust. Evict them. Sophia. Marcus hesitated. Tonight. Tonight, I said. If they want to cry about being homeless, let us give them a reason to cry for real. I hung up the phone. I looked at the dark screen of my device. The notifications were still rolling in like waves crashing against a shore. Hate mail, death threats, calls for my resignation. Let them come, I thought. Let them scream. My family had started a fire thinking I would burn. They forgot that I was the one who built the chimney. I was not going to burn. I was going to smoke them out. Driver. I said, my voice cold as ice. Drive faster. We have work to do. Dưới đây là phần nội dung tiếng Anh chi tiết cho phần 8, được viết liền mạch, không sử dụng tiêu đề hay ký tự đặc biệt để phù hợp với giọng đọc AI, tập trung vào xung đột pháp lý và cuộc gọi tống tiền. The morning sun hit the glass walls of my corner office in Manhattan, but it brought no warmth. My desk, usually a sanctuary of order, was contaminated by a thick envelope that had just been delivered by a bicycle courier. It was not from a top-tier law firm. It was not on heavy bond paper with a watermark. It was a manila envelope stuffed with documents that looked like they had been printed on a home inkjet printer running low on toner. I picked up the cover letter. The letterhead read, "The Law Offices of Miller and Associates." I knew Miller. He was Greg's drinking buddy from college, a personal injury lawyer, whose billboards littered the highway offering quick settlements for slip-and-fall accidents. Now apparently, he was a corporate litigator suing a company valued at $300 million. I sat down in my Aeron chair and began to read. The legal complaint was a masterpiece of fiction. Plaintiff Byron Brooks alleges that he entered into a verbal joint venture agreement with defendant Sophia Brooks in 2014. It claimed that the $5,000 was not a gift, but a capital contribution. It claimed that my entire business model, the proprietary AI logistics software I had spent sleepless nights coding, was actually based on trade secrets discussed at the family dinner table. I felt a vain throb in my temple. Trade secrets. My father thought the cloud was something that caused rain. My mother thought algorithms were a type of dance. And yet here they were claiming in federal court that Greenstream Logistics was the fruit of our collective family genius. The language in the filing was designed to humiliate. It referred to my company as a family asset, misappropriated by a rogue agent. It described me not as a founder, but as a custodian of family property. They were trying to strip me of my title, my history, and my identity. They wanted to rewrite reality so that my success was actually their success that I had stolen. My intercom buzzed. It was my assistant. "Sophia, your brother-in-law is on line 1. He says it is urgent, regarding a settlement." I stared at the blinking light on my phone. A settlement. They had filed the lawsuit at 9 a.m. and were calling to settle by 10. This was not a legal strategy. This was a shakedown. I pressed the button and put the call on speaker. I pulled my digital recorder out of my desk drawer and pressed record. "Hello, Greg," I said, my voice flat. Sophia Greg's voice filled the room. It was smooth, oily, and dripping with fake concern. "I am glad you picked up. Look, I just saw the paperwork Miller sent over. I told him it was too aggressive. You know how lawyers are. They always want to go for the throat." "You hired him, Greg," I reminded him. "I just made an introduction." Greg lied effortlessly. "Listen, Sophia, I am calling because I am worried about you. Really worried. Dad is furious. He is talking about going on Good Morning America next week. He wants to tell the whole world how you tricked him out of his investment. And Keisha, well, you saw the live stream. She is just getting started." I leaned back in my chair, watching the tape counter on my recorder tick upward. "Get to the point, Greg. The point is, this can all go away," Greg said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I have been talking to Dad all morning. I told him 40% is unreasonable. I told him Sophia worked hard. She deserves to keep the majority. I talked him down, Sophia." "I did that for you. How generous of you," I said dryly. "I got him to agree to a flat number." Greg continued, ignoring my sarcasm. $10 million. Cash. Wired today. You send the money and the lawsuit disappears. Keisha deletes the video. Dad issues a statement saying he is so proud of you. We go back to being a happy family. $10 million. The number hung in the air. Last night it was 130 million. Now it was 10. It was a fire sale. They were desperate. They knew the lawsuit was bogus. They knew they would lose in court eventually, but they were banking on the fact that I would pay 10 million just to stop the noise, to stop the embarrassment. And where should I wire this $10 million, I asked. To Dad's account. There was a pause on the other end. Actually, Greg said, clearing his throat. Dad is not great with technology. And with the whole tax situation you mentioned last night, we figure it is better if you wire it to a consulting firm I set up. Brooks Family Consulting LLC. I will handle the distribution to make sure everything is tax efficient. I closed my eyes. He was so arrogant. He was so blinded by greed that he did not even realize what he had just walked into. He was asking me to wire funds across state lines to a shell company to prevent the release of damaging information. Greg, I asked slowly, clearly, are you telling me that if I do not pay you $10 million right now, you will continue to damage my reputation and pursue this frivolous lawsuit? I am telling you that for a consulting fee of $10 million, I can make your problems vanish, Greg said. It is just business, Sophia. Think of it as a crisis management fee. You can afford it. You are rich. What is 10 million to you? It is pocket change. Just pay it and we can all move on. I looked at the recorder. I had everything I needed. Greg, I said, my voice changing, shifting from the victim to the executioner. Do you know what Title 18 United States Code Section 875 is? What? Greg sounded confused. What are you talking about? It is the federal statute for interstate extortion, I explained calmly. And since you are on a phone line asking for money in exchange for silence, that also triggers wire fraud statutes. You just demanded $10 million to call off a harassment campaign that you organized. There was silence on the other end, then a nervous laugh. Come on, Sophia, do not be dramatic. I am your brother-in-law. I am trying to help you settle a family dispute. No, Greg, I said. You are a blackmailer, and you are not very good at it. You just instructed me to wire money to an LLC controlled by you to avoid a lawsuit filed by your friend. That is conspiracy. And the best part is, I recorded this entire call. The line went dead silent. I could hear him breathing fast and shallow. You recorded me? Greg stammered. You cannot do that. That is illegal. Actually, New York is a one-party consent state, I said, my eyes scanning the skyline of the city I owned. As long as I consent to the recording, it is perfectly legal. And I consent. Sophia, wait. Greg said, his voice rising in panic. Let us not be hasty. I was just throwing out numbers. We can negotiate. 5 million. 1 million. Just give Dad something. It is too late for negotiations, Greg, I said. You wanted to play businessman. Now you are going to learn about liability. I'm going to take this recording and I'm going to send it to the Ethics Board of the State Bar Association to have your friend Miller disbarred. And then I am going to send it to the district attorney. Sophia, please, Greg begged. I have a kid. Keisha is pregnant again. You cannot do this. I did not do this. Greg, I said, cold as ice. You did. You got greedy. You thought I was weak because I was family. You forgot that I swim with sharks every day. You are just a minnow, Greg. And you just swam into the wrong mouth. I hung up the phone. My hand was steady. I ejected the digital file and saved it to 3 different secure cloud servers. I looked at the lawsuit on my desk. The threats, the lies, the insults, they thought paper could hurt me. They did not know that I could turn paper into prison bars. I pressed the intercom button. Get my lawyers on the phone, I told my assistant. And call the FBI. I want to report an extortion attempt. I sat back in my chair. The sadness was gone. The nostalgia was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard calculus of survival. They wanted a war. I was going to give them an apocalypse. Dưới đây là phần nội dung tiếng Anh chi tiết cho phần 9 được viết liền mạch, không sử dụng tiêu đề hay ký tự đặc biệt để phù hợp với giọng đọc AI. Go. After I saved the recording of Greg attempting to extort me, I did not sit back and wait for their next move. In my world, information is the only currency that matters, and right now I was operating in a deficit. I needed to know exactly why my family had suddenly become so aggressive. Greed is a powerful motivator, but desperation is the only thing that makes people reckless enough to blackmail a CEO on a recorded line. I picked up my secure phone and dialed a number that did not exist in my contacts list. It belonged to Silas, a forensic accountant and private investigator who usually handled corporate espionage for my firm. He was expensive, he was discreet, and he was terrifyingly efficient. I told him I needed a full financial autopsy on 3 individuals: Byron Brooks, Viola Brooks, and Gregory Miller. I told him I needed it in 4 hours. Silas arrived at my office 3 hours and 45 minutes later. He did not look like a detective from the movies. He looked like a librarian wearing a beige cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses carrying a thick leather briefcase. He sat down opposite my desk and placed a single heavy binder on the glass surface. He did not smile. He did not ask how I was doing. He simply opened the binder and spun it around to face me. "You are not going to like this, Sophia," he said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. I opened the first tab marked Gregory Miller. I expected to see details about his salary, his debts, maybe some credit card issues. But the first page was an employment verification form from the insurance company where he claimed to be a rising star. Across the top in bold red letters was the word "terminated." He was fired 6 months ago, Silas explained, pointing to the date. He was let go for cause. Apparently, he was falsifying claims to hit quotas. He has not worked a day since. I stared at the paper, the dinner, the celebration, the toast to the senior assistant manager. It was all a lie. He had sat at my parents' table eating roast beef, drinking wine, and accepting praise for a job he did not have. "So where does he go every day?" I asked. "Keisha posts stories of him leaving in a suit every morning. He goes to a Starbucks on 4th Street, Silas said, flipping a page to show surveillance photos. "He sits there from 9 to 5 using the free Wi-Fi to play online poker and trade cryptocurrency. He brings a packed lunch." I felt a wave of disgust roll over me. He was playing house, pretending to be the provider while my sister lived in a fantasy world, but that did not explain why he needed $10 million today, or why my parents were involved. I turned to the next tab marked Byron and Viola Brooks. "This is the part that hurts," Silas warned me. I looked at the summary page. My eyes went straight to the property section. The house on Maple Street. The house I grew up in. The house I had paid off for them 5 years ago, writing a check for $200,000 so they could retire debt-free. The status column read, "Pre-foreclosure." I looked up at Silas. "How is this possible? I paid the mortgage off. I have the deed in the trust." "They took out a home equity line of credit 6 months ago," Silas said. "They leveraged the entire value of the property. $350,000. High-interest variable rate. They signed the papers without legal counsel." "And where did the money go?" I whispered, though I was starting to suspect the answer. I turned the page to the bank statements. There were transfers, massive outgoing wire transfers: 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, all sent to an account controlled by Gregory Miller. I felt sick. My father, the man who made me beg for $5,000, had handed over his entire net worth to a liar. Greg convinced them he had an insider tip. Silas explained, his finger tracing the transaction lines. A new cryptocurrency. Something called Moonrise Coin. He told them he could triple their money in 3 months. He told them it was how he was going to buy Keisha the estate in the Hamptons. He promised them generational wealth. "And what happened to the coin?" I asked, staring at the numbers. "It was a rug pull," Silas said. "The developers drained the liquidity pool and vanished. The coin is worth zero. Greg lost everything. Your parents' money is gone, Sophia. Every cent." I sat back in my chair, feeling the room spin. They were broke. My parents were not just greedy, they were destitute. They had bet their home on a man who lied about his job and they had lost. And the bank, Silas continued. They have served the notice of default. The auction is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. If they do not come up with $350,000 plus penalties by the 14th, the sheriff will evict them. The picture was now complete. The sudden dinner invitation, the demand for money, the lawsuit, the blackmail. It was not just about getting rich. It was a frantic, clawing attempt to survive. They were 2 weeks away from being homeless. They were 2 weeks away from their neighbors seeing their furniture on the lawn. The shame would destroy my father. The reality check would destroy Keisha. So they decided to rob me. Instead of coming to me and telling the truth, instead of admitting they made a mistake and asking for help, they tried to destroy my reputation to cover their tracks. My father preferred to sue his own daughter than admit he was scammed by his son-in-law. My mother preferred to call me ungrateful online than admit she gambled her house away. Greg told them the lawsuit would be a quick settlement, Silas said, interpreting my silence. He told them companies like yours settle to avoid bad press. He told them it was a guaranteed payday before the eviction notice hit the door. He is using them, Sophia. He is using their desperation to save his own skin. I looked at the photos of Greg sitting in the coffee shop staring at his laptop. He looked pathetic, but he was also dangerous. A drowning man will drag anyone down with him, and Greg had latched onto my parents and was pulling them into the abyss. I closed the binder. The heavy thud echoed in the office. "Thank you, Silas," I said. "Leave the file." Silas stood up to leave but paused at the door. "One more thing, Sophia. I checked the IP address of the device used to upload Keisha's live stream last night. It was not uploaded from their house. It was uploaded from the Wi-Fi network at the Starbucks on 4th Street. Greg filmed it. Greg directed it. He's orchestrating every move." When Silas left, I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city, at the empire I had built with honesty and grit. My family had none of that. They lived on lies. They ate lies for dinner. And now the bill for those lies had come due. I looked at the calendar on my wall. 2 weeks. They had 2 weeks before the sheriff arrived. They wanted $10 million to make the problem go away. They wanted me to be their savior again. But saving them now would only enable them. If I wrote a check, Greg would steal it. If I paid off the house, they would leverage it again. No, I was not going to save them with money. I was going to save them with the truth. And the truth was going to hurt much more than poverty. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Prepare the countersuit," I said, "and draft a purchase agreement for a property on Maple Street. I am going to buy the note from the bank." "You want to pay off their debt?" my lawyer asked, confused. "No," I said, my voice hard. "I want to be the one who holds the mortgage. When the foreclosure happens, I want to be the one standing on the lawn." I hung up. I looked at the binder one last time. Knowledge is power, and I now had the power to crush them or to free them. But first I had to let them think they were winning. I had to let them think their blackmail was working. I needed them all in one room one last time. I sent a text to my father. "Let's meet, tomorrow night. I will bring the check." It was a lie, but it was the only language they understood. The binder Silas left on my glass desk felt heavy, not because of the paper inside, but because of the radioactive secrets it contained. I had already seen the debts. I had seen the gambling losses. I had seen the lies about Greg's employment. But Silas had told me the real weapon was in the back under the tab marked Taxes 2014. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands steady now. The panic from the live stream and the extortion call had evaporated, replaced by a cold surgical focus. I opened the binder to the year 2014. This was the year I had knelt on the kitchen floor. This was the year I had begged for $5,000. This was the year my father had thrown the money at me and called it an investment in his own tax relief. I scanned the Form 1040. It was standard for a man of my father's station at the time. Moderate income from the post office, standard deductions. And then I turned to Schedule A itemized deductions. My finger traced down the lines of numbers until it stopped at line 16. Gifts to charity. There it was, $5,000. But it was not just a number. Because the amount exceeded $500 for a non-cash or unusual contribution, there was a supplemental form attached. Form 8283, Non-Cash Charitable Contributions. I pulled the page closer, my eyes widening as I read the handwriting. It was my father's handwriting, jagged and aggressive. In the section for description of donated property, he had not written cash. He had written humanitarian aid. In the section for donee, he had not written a registered 501c3 charity. He had checked a box marked Other and written a descriptive note. Assistance to indigent family member unable to support self, non-recoverable. I stared at the words, indigent, non-recoverable. He had not just called me a charity case to my face, he had sworn it to the United States government. He had told the Internal Revenue Service under penalty of perjury that the money he gave me was a gift with zero expectation of being paid back. He had done this to lower his taxable income. Based on his tax bracket at the time, this deduction probably saved him about $1,500. $1,500. That was the price of my father's integrity. That was the value he placed on our relationship. He had sold the right to call himself my partner for $1,500. And then my eyes drifted to the bottom of the page. To the preparer's signature. I recognized the loop of the G immediately. Gregory Miller. Greg had prepared these taxes. Greg had advised him to do this. I could almost hear Greg's voice in the kitchen 10 years ago telling my dad, "Hey Byron, if we classify this as a gift to a needy relative, we can write it off and you can get a bigger refund." I sat back in my chair, and the absurdity of it hit me like a physical blow. Here was the paradox. Here was the trap they had built for themselves. In their lawsuit filed this morning, they claimed the $5,000 was an investment, a capital contribution in exchange for equity. But in their tax returns filed 10 years ago, they claimed it was a charitable gift with no return expected. They could not have it both ways. If they went to court to fight for the equity, they would have to admit that this tax return was fraudulent. That would be tax fraud, filing a false return, conspiracy to defraud the IRS. Since Greg signed it and Byron signed it, they would both be liable. That is a felony. That means prison time. But if they stuck to the tax return to stay out of jail, then they had to admit the money was a gift. And if it is a gift, they have zero claim to my company. You cannot demand 40% of a company because you gave the CEO a birthday present 10 years ago. It was a perfect binary trap. Option A. They drop the lawsuit and get nothing. Option B. They pursue the lawsuit, admit to a federal crime, and go to prison. I started to chuckle. The sound was dry at first, scratching my throat. But then the irony of it expanded in my chest. My father was so cheap, so desperate to save a few pennies back then, that he had inadvertently signed away his rights to a fortune. His own stinginess was his undoing. The chuckle grew into a laugh. A loud, unladylike laugh that bounced off the glass walls of my office. I laughed until tears streamed down my face. I laughed for the 22-year-old girl who had cried on the floor. I laughed for the woman who had felt worthless because her father looked at her with disgust. He thought he was being smart. He thought he was gaming the system. Indigent daughter. Who is indigent now? Dad? I said aloud to the empty room, wiping a tear from my eye. I looked at the document again. It was beautiful. It was not just a piece of paper. It was a sword. A sword forged in the fires of their own greed. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Sarah," I said, my voice still thick with mirth. "Sophia, are you okay? You sound hysterical." "I am fine, Sarah. I am better than fine. Listen, I need you to print something out for me, a specific section of the federal tax code." "Which section?" Sarah asked, confused. "The section regarding tax fraud and the penalties for filing false returns," I said. "And Sarah, do we have a contact at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division?" We do, Sarah said, her voice dropping. Sophia, what did you find? I found the smoking gun, I said. Or rather, I found the receipt. Listen to me carefully. I am not settling. I am not wiring $10 million. I am going to meet them tomorrow. You are meeting them, Sarah asked, alarmed. Sophia. That is dangerous. They are desperate. I know, I said. But I need to see their faces. I need to see the moment they realize that they handed me the weapon that is going to end them. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Below me, millions of people were rushing home to their families, to dinners and hugs and warmth. I did not have that. I had a binder full of crimes and a heart full of ice. But in this moment, looking at the reflection of my face in the glass, I realized something. I did not need their love. Love is messy. Love is conditional. I had leverage, and leverage never lies. I went back to my desk and picked up the binder. I ran my fingers over the signature line. Gregory Miller, Byron Brooks. 2 names bound together by a lie. Tomorrow night I would untie the knot, and I would watch them hang. I packed the binder into my bag. I grabbed the digital recorder with the extortion tape. I checked my appearance in the mirror. My eyes were bright, my posture was straight. The grieving daughter was gone. The victim was gone. The auditor was ready for her appointment. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in the art of radio silence. In the world of public relations, silence is usually interpreted as an admission of guilt. When a scandal breaks, the accused is supposed to issue a denial release, a statement, or appear on a morning talk show to weep and ask for forgiveness. My silence was deafening. It created a vacuum that my family rushed to fill with their noise. Keisha took my lack of response as a sign of total defeat. Emboldened by her viral success, she launched a marathon of content. She went live 3 times in one day. She posted a series of TikToks reenacting childhood traumas that never happened. She cried about how I used to steal her lunch money, which was ironic considering I was the one buying the groceries. Her follower count swelled to 700,000. She was high on the dopamine of attention and the promise of a payday. She started tagging brands in her hate posts, trying to secure sponsorship deals for her misery. My parents were equally intoxicated by the smell of imaginary money. Silas, my private investigator, sent me updates that would have been funny if they were not so tragic. Byron and Viola spent the afternoon touring a $4 million estate in Alpine, New Jersey. They walked through marble hallways they could not afford, critiquing the finishes. My father told the real estate agent that they were expecting a significant liquidity event within 48 hours. They even put down a $10,000 deposit on a credit card that was already near its limit, confident that my $10 million wire was just a signature away. They were spending the settlement before I had even agreed to a meeting. They were so blinded by their own narrative that they forgot who they were dealing with. They forgot that I did not build a logistics empire by being emotional. I built it by being a predator who knows how to wait in the tall grass. While they were measuring curtains for a mansion that would never be theirs, I was sitting in a conference room on the 45th floor of a building in Midtown. The view was breathtaking, but I was focused on the mahogany table in front of me. Sitting across from me were 3 of the most expensive litigators in New York City. These were not billboard lawyers like Greg's friend Miller. These were sharks in bespoke suits, men and women who billed $1,500 an hour to dismantle corporations and crush rebellions. In the center of the table sat the binder, the red binder. We had spent the last 10 hours organizing the evidence. It was a beautiful, terrifying compilation of their sins. Tab 1 contained the transcript and audio file of Greg attempting to extort $10 million from me. My lawyers confirmed it met every criteria for federal wire fraud and extortion. Tab 2 contained the forensic accounting report Silas had compiled showing the gambling losses, the crypto scams, and the misappropriation of my parents' home equity. Tab 3 contained the foreclosure notice from the bank, proving my parents were days away from eviction. And Tab 4, the crown jewel, contained the IRS tax returns from 2014 and 2015, signed by Byron Brooks and prepared by Gregory Miller. proving they had declared my seed money as a non-recoverable charitable gift. My lead attorney, a silver-haired woman named Eleanor, looked at the stack of documents and then looked at me over her reading glasses. "You have enough here to put them all in prison for 5 to 7 years, she said, her voice devoid of sentiment. The tax fraud alone carries a mandatory minimum if the IRS decides to prosecute aggressively. And with the extortion added on, Greg is looking at a decade. Are you sure you want to do this, Sophia? These are your parents." I looked at the binder. I thought about the live stream. I thought about the fake bruises. I thought about the Gucci bag and the roast beef and the years of being made to feel small. "They made their choice, Eleanor," I said. "They chose money over blood. I am just honoring their decision." "I do not want to file the charges yet," I continued. "I want them to sign a confession. I want them to sign a complete release of claims, a non-disclosure agreement, and a permanent restraining order. I want them to admit on paper that every word they said was a lie, and I want them to do it in front of a witness." Eleanor nodded. "And if they refuse?" "Then we open the binder," I said, "and we call the district attorney." It was time to set the trap. I picked up my phone. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of the device itself, but because of the finality of what I was about to do. I opened the text thread with my father. The last message was his demand for money. I typed slowly, making sure every word was calculated to feed their ego. "Dad, you win. I cannot take the pressure anymore. The media is destroying me. I agree to your terms. Let us meet tomorrow night at your house to sign the papers. I will bring the check." I paused, then added the final bait. "Please invite Pastor Jenkins. I want a man of God present to witness our reconciliation. I want to make this right in the eyes of the church." I hit send. The response came in less than 30 seconds. "Praise God. We knew you would come to your senses. 7 p.m. Do not be late. And Sophia, bring the full amount." I stared at the screen. Praise God. He was thanking God for a successful blackmail scheme. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but it was also perfect. Having the pastor there was my idea. They thought he was there to lend moral authority to their victory. In reality, he was there to witness their humiliation. I wanted a pillar of their community to see exactly who they really were when the masks came off. I packed the binder into my bag. My lawyers handed me the settlement agreement we had drafted. It was brutal. It stripped them of everything. It required them to publicly recant their lies, to transfer the deed of the house to me immediately to avoid foreclosure, and to never contact me again. I walked out of the law firm and into the cool night air. The city was alive with energy. I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard resolve of a CEO executing a hostile takeover. I went home to my penthouse. I did not turn on the TV. I did not check social media. I poured myself a glass of vintage wine and stood on my balcony, looking out at the empire I had built. Across the river, in a house that was already technically in foreclosure, my family was probably celebrating. I imagined Greg popping a bottle of cheap champagne. I imagined Keisha picking out outfits for her new life as an heiress. I imagined my mother crying happy tears, thanking Jesus for softening my heart. They were celebrating their victory. They did not know they were celebrating their own funeral. I took a sip of wine. "Enjoy the night, family," I whispered to the wind, "because tomorrow the auditor arrives. And this time I am not bringing a checkbook. I am bringing the truth, and the truth is going to cost you everything." Dưới đây là phần nội dung tiếng Anh chi tiết cho phần 12 được viết liền mạch, không sử dụng tiêu đề hay ký tự đặc biệt, để phù hợp với giọng đọc AI, tập trung vào không khí ngột ngạt của bữa tiệc và màn ép cũng tinh vi của gia đình. The driveway of my parents' house looked less like a private residence and more like a church parking lot on Easter Sunday. Cars were jammed onto the lawn. There were Hondas and Toyotas belonging to aunts I had not spoken to in 5 years, and cousins who only called me when they needed bail money. My father had not just invited a few witnesses, he had invited an audience. He wanted to turn my capitulation into a spectator sport. I instructed my driver to stop at the end of the block. I did not want the Bentley to be the first thing they saw. I wanted to walk in on my own 2 feet. I stepped out into the humid evening air. I was not wearing the power suit from yesterday. I was wearing a simple black dress, dignified but somber. In my left hand I carried a bottle of wine. It was a $10 bottle of Merlot, the kind with a screw top that my father used to drink by the gallon before he started pretending to have expensive taste. In my right hand I carried the red binder. I walked up the concrete path to the front door. I could hear the noise from inside. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of gossip. They were already celebrating. They were drinking to their good fortune, spending the money I had not yet given them. I opened the door and the noise died down instantly. It was as if someone had cut the power cord to a speaker. 30 heads turned to look at me. I saw Aunt Sarah, who had told me I was too ambitious for a girl. I saw Cousin Marcus, who had stolen my laptop in college. I saw neighbors I barely recognized. They were all holding plates of food and glasses of champagne. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my mother Viola stepped forward. She was wearing a new dress, something flowing and floral, that looked suspiciously like it came from a boutique in the mall she could not afford. She opened her arms wide, performing the role of the forgiving matriarch. "Sophia," she cried out, her voice thick with fake emotion. "The prodigal daughter returns. Praise Jesus." She hugged me. Her body felt stiff and cold against mine. She smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. I did not hug her back. I stood there like a statue, my arms at my sides holding my wine and my binder. Come in," Viola said, pulling away and ushering me into the living room. "Look, everyone. She is here. Our girl is here to make things right." The room erupted in applause. It was sickening. They were clapping for me not because they loved me, but because they thought I was a broken ATM machine finally dispensing cash. My father was sitting in his recliner, which had been pulled to the center of the room like a throne. Next to him sat Pastor Jenkins. The pastor was a heavy-set man with a booming voice and a suit that shone under the lights. He was the ultimate authority in our community. If the pastor blessed it, it was righteous. My father had brought him in to sanctify the extortion. "Sophia," my father said, remaining seated, "you are late, but we forgive you. Tonight is a night for forgiveness." I walked to the center of the room. I placed the cheap bottle of wine on the coffee table. It made a hollow thud next to the crystal glasses they had set out. "I brought this for you, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "It is your favorite brand, or at least it used to be." Byron looked at the cheap bottle with disdain, but he forced a smile. "Thank you, Sophia. It is the thought that counts. Now sit down. We have business to discuss." I did not sit. I remained standing, towering over him in his recliner. "I prefer to stand," I said. Greg emerged from the kitchen. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too large for him, probably one he had bought for his imaginary job. He was holding a leather portfolio. He looked around the room, soaking in the attention. He felt like the kingmaker. He walked over to my father and handed him a document. Pastor Jenkins cleared his throat. He stood up, holding a Bible in his massive hands. The room fell silent again. Everyone bowed their heads, expecting a prayer. Sophia the pastor began, his voice resonating off the walls. "Your father has told me everything. He told me about the struggle, about the misunderstanding, and I want to tell you that I am proud of you." He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. "The Bible says, 'To whom much is given, much is required.' You have been blessed, Sophia. You have been blessed with wealth, with influence, with power. But those blessings are not yours to hoard. They belong to the community. They belong to the family that raised you." He looked around the room at the nodding faces of my relatives. "Honor thy father and mother," the pastor continued. "That is the first commandment with a promise. Tonight you have a chance to honor them. You have a chance to wash away the sin of greed and selfishness. You have a chance to be a good daughter again." It was a masterclass in spiritual manipulation. He was using God to guilt-trip me into signing a check. He was framing my hard-earned success as a sin and their extortion as a holy act. Greg stepped forward, seizing the moment. He opened the leather portfolio and pulled out a sleek silver pen. He placed a document on the coffee table next to the cheap wine. It was the settlement agreement. I could see the number $10 million typed in bold at the top, and below it a clause transferring 40% of my voting rights to a family trust controlled by Byron Brooks. "We made it simple for you, Sophia." Greg said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Just like we discussed on the phone, 10 million now. And the equity transfer. It is a fair deal. It is 40%. That leaves you with 60. You are still the boss. You still get to be the CEO." He uncapped the pen and held it out to me. "Sign it," Greg urged. "Sign it, and we can all eat." Mom made her peach cobbler. Keisha deleted the video from her phone. She is just waiting to delete it from the servers. Everything goes back to normal. I looked at the pen. I looked at the pastor, who was nodding encouragingly. I looked at my mother, who was wiping a tear from her eye. I looked at my father, who was leaning forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on my hand. They really believed this was it. They thought the pressure of the crowd, the weight of the religion, and the threat of the scandal had broken me. They saw a woman standing alone, defeated and ready to surrender. They did not see the red binder in my right hand. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch out until it was uncomfortable. "You went to a lot of trouble," I said, looking at the crowd. "You invited everyone. You brought the pastor. You even bought champagne." "We wanted to celebrate you, Sophia," my mother said. "No," I said, cutting her off. "You wanted to witness me. You wanted to make sure I could not back out. You wanted to shame me into submission." Sophia, the pastor warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Be careful with your tone. Pride goes before a fall." I looked at the pastor. "You are right, Pastor," I said. "Pride does go before a fall, but you are confused about who is standing on the edge of the cliff." I stepped forward and placed the red binder on the table directly on top of the settlement agreement. The heavy thud echoed in the room. "I am not going to sign that paper," I said. A murmur went through the crowd. My father's face darkened. "Sophia, do not do this," Byron growled. "We had a deal. Do not make me ruin you." "I am not ruining anyone, Dad," I said, my hand resting on the cover of the binder. "I am just balancing the books. You asked for an accounting of your investment. You asked for what you are owed." I looked at Greg. He looked nervous. He recognized the look in my eye. It was not the look of a victim. It was the look of a CEO who had just found a discrepancy in the ledger. "Greg, why don't you sit down?" I said. "You are going to want to be seated for this." "What is that?" Greg asked, pointing at the binder. "This," I said, patting the cover. "This is the truth. You brought the Bible. I brought the receipts." I flipped the cover open. The first page was a blown-up photocopy of the handwritten note from 10 years ago. "Let us start with the beginning," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "Let us start with $5,000 and a kitchen floor." I flipped open the cover of the red binder. The sound was sharp, like the crack of a whip in the silent room. I did not look up. I kept my eyes focused on the documents, running my finger down the page with agonizing slowness. I could feel their eyes on me. They were confused. They were expecting a check, a wire transfer confirmation, or a signed surrender. Instead, they were looking at a photocopy of a standard government form. "Dad," I said, my voice low and steady. "You said earlier that $5,000 was an investment. You said it was seed capital. You said you were an angel investor who took a risk on his daughter." I looked up, then locking eyes with him. "If that is true, then why does the Internal Revenue Service have a different story?" Byron frowned, shifting in his throne. "What are you talking about, Sophia? That is just paperwork." "It is not just paperwork, Dad," I corrected him. "It is a sworn statement. It is a federal declaration. And right here on page 12 of your 2015 tax return, you told a very different story about that money." I turned the binder around and slid it across the coffee table toward him. He looked down, his eyes squinting behind his glasses. Read line 16. Dad, I commanded. Read it out loud so the pastor can hear. Byron hesitated. He looked at Greg, who was suddenly very pale. Read it, I said, my voice hardening. Byron leaned forward. Gifts to charity, he mumbled. Louder, I said, and read the description in the supplemental section. Byron swallowed hard. Assistance to indigent family member unable to support self. Non-recoverable. No goods or services received in exchange. The room went deadly quiet. The words hung in the air, stripping away the myth of the benevolent father. Indigent. Unable to support self. Non-recoverable. I stood up and walked around the table, pacing slowly like a prosecutor in front of a jury. You see the problem here, don't you, Dad? You cannot have it both ways. You cannot claim a tax deduction for a charitable gift, and then 10 years later, claim it was an equity investment. If it is an investment, you expected a profit. If you expected a profit, you committed perjury when you signed this form saying you did not. I stopped in front of the pastor. You know what the Bible says about two masters, Pastor. You cannot serve both God and money, and you certainly cannot serve both the IRS and your own greed. My father tried to cheat the government to save $1,500 in taxes. He declared me a charity case. And because he did that because he was so cheap and so eager to write me off, he legally forfeited any claim to my company. I turned back to my father. A gift is a gift, Dad. Once you give it, it is gone. You do not get to come back a decade later when the recipient is successful and ask for 40% of the harvest. That is not how the law works. And that is definitely not how the IRS works. My mother Viola let out a confused whimper. But Sophia, we are family. Does a piece of paper matter more than family? In court, Mom. Yes, it does, I said. And that brings me to the most interesting part of this binder. I turned my attention to Greg. He was sitting on the edge of the sofa, gripping his knees so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a man who was watching a tsunami approach from the beach, knowing he could not outrun it. Greg, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone which made it even more terrifying. You are the financial expert here, right? You are the one with the leather portfolio and the big ideas. Greg opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I pointed to the bottom of the tax return. That is your signature right there, Greg. Paid preparer. You prepared these taxes. You advised my father to classify that money as a gift. You signed your name verifying that everything in this document was true and correct under penalty of perjury. I took a step closer to him. He shrank back into the cushions. And today you filed a lawsuit claiming the exact opposite. You filed a legal complaint stating that the money was an investment. I let a small, cold smile play on my lips. Do you know what that is called, Greg? It is called filing a false return. It is called tax fraud. And since you used the mail and the internet to coordinate this little scheme, it is also mail fraud and wire fraud. I leaned down until my face was level with his. I could smell the cheap cologne he wore to mask the scent of his fear. I had my lawyers look up the sentencing guidelines this afternoon, Greg. For federal tax fraud of this nature, especially when it involves a conspiracy to extort money, the mandatory minimum sentence is 3 years in federal prison. Not county jail, Greg. Federal prison. The kind where you do not get to come home on weekends. I stood up and walked back to the center of the room, addressing the entire family. And the fines, I continued. The IRS does not play games. The penalty for civil fraud is 75% of the underpayment. But for criminal fraud, which is what this is, the fines can go up to 250%. Plus interest. 10 years of compound interest. I looked at my father, who was now clutching his chest. You want $130 million, Dad. If I turn this binder over to the IRS tomorrow, you will not be getting a check. You will be getting an indictment. You will lose this house. You will lose your pension. You will lose your freedom. And Greg, I looked at my sister Keisha, who was staring at her husband with horror. Greg will be in prison until your unborn child is in kindergarten. The silence that followed was absolute. The relatives who had been clapping earlier were now looking at the floor, trying to make themselves invisible. The pastor closed his Bible with a soft thud and took a step back, distancing himself from the blast zone. My mother looked at Greg. "Is this true?" she whispered. "Greg, tell her she is lying. Tell her it was an investment." Greg looked up. His arrogance was gone. His swagger was gone. He looked small and pathetic. I thought we could fix it," he stammered. "I thought if she just paid the settlement." "So you admitted it," I said, pouncing on his words. "You admitted that you knew it was a lie. You were just hoping I would pay you to keep quiet before anyone checked the paperwork." I picked up the settlement agreement he had placed on the table, the one that demanded $10 million and 40% of my company. "This," I said, holding it up. "This is evidence of extortion." I ripped the paper in half. The sound was loud and satisfying. I ripped it again and again until it was just confetti falling from my hands onto the carpet. "I am not signing anything," I said. "I am not paying you a dime. In fact, I am the one who should be charging you. I paid off this house. I sent you checks for 5 years. I tried to buy your love, and all it got me was betrayal." I looked at my father. He looked old suddenly. The air had gone out of him. He slumped in his recliner, a defeated king on a crumbling throne. "You called me indigent, Dad. You threw money at me like I was a beggar. And now the beggar is the only thing standing between you and a prison cell." I reached into the pocket of the binder and pulled out a different document. It was a single page, crisp and white. "I have a new deal for you," I said, placing it on the table. "It is not $10 million. It is a surrender." I looked at them all. The sharks, the leeches, the hypocrites. "You have 5 minutes to decide," I said, checking my diamond watch. "You can sign this paper admitting that everything you said was a lie and agreeing to disappear from my life forever. Or I walk out that door with this binder and I go straight to the FBI field office." I looked at Greg. Tick-tock, Greg. "Prison does not have a VIP section." The silence that followed my threat was heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a scream. I watched the blood drain from Greg's face. It happened in slow motion. One moment, he was the arrogant architect of my destruction, and the next, he was a terrified man realizing that the ground beneath him had turned into a trapdoor. He looked at the red binder on the table as if it were a radioactive isotope that was slowly poisoning him. His hands, which had been so steady when he handed me the extortion contract, began to tremble violently. The silver pen he had offered me slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the glass table, sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. That sound broke the spell. The room exploded into chaos. It was not the chaos of a united front fighting an external enemy. It was the chaos of rats scrambling over each other as the ship went down. My mother Viola was the first to break. The mask of the doting matriarch vanished completely, replaced by the snarling face of a woman who was watching her lifestyle evaporate. She turned on Greg with a speed that was terrifying. "You told us this was legal," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You told us it was standard business negotiation. You said she would just pay the money and we would be safe." Greg stammered, trying to back away from her. "Viola, I mean the law is open to interpretation." "Interpretation," Viola shrieked. "She is talking about prison, Greg. She is talking about the IRS. You prepared those taxes. You told Byron to sign them. You said it was a smart loophole. You did not tell us it was a felony." She began to hit him. My mother, the church lady who prided herself on her decorum, was slapping her son-in-law on the shoulder with her manicured hands. "You ruined us," she wailed. "You gambled away our house on that stupid crypto coin, and now you are going to send us to jail. Get out of my house." Byron, my father, was clutching his chest. He was not faking it this time. The reality of his situation had finally pierced his armor of arrogance. He looked at the pastor who was slowly backing away toward the door, trying to make himself invisible. My father realized in that moment that his reputation was dead. If this binder became public, he would not just be poor. He would be a pariah. "Sophia!" he gasped, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You cannot do this. I am an old man. I have a heart condition. Prison would kill me. You cannot send your own father to prison." I looked at him calmly. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a cold, clinical observation of a man who was willing to destroy me 5 minutes ago, begging for mercy now. "I am not sending you to prison, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You sent yourself to prison 10 years ago when you decided I was worth less than a tax deduction. I am just the messenger." Keisha was sitting on the sofa, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was not looking at Greg. She was not looking at our parents. She was looking at her phone, frantically deleting the live stream she had just broadcast. She realized that if I sued her for defamation, she would lose everything: her brand, her followers, her freedom. "This is not my fault," Keisha cried out, her voice shrill. "I just did what you guys told me to do. Greg wrote the script for the video. Mom told me to cry. I did not know about the tax returns. I am a victim here too." Greg looked at his wife, his eyes filled with betrayal. "Keisha, honey, we are in this together." "No, we are not," Keisha snapped, recoiling from him. "I am not going to jail for you, Greg. I have a baby on the way. I have a career. You are the one who lied about your job. You are the one who messed up the taxes. Fix it." I watched them tear each other apart. It was ugly, it was pathetic, and it was exactly what I needed to see. It confirmed what I had always suspected. There was no loyalty in this family. There was only convenience. As long as the money was flowing, they were a unit. The moment the heat was turned on, they were cannibals. I reached into my bag and pulled out the single sheet of paper I had prepared with my lawyers. It was crisp and white, contrasting sharply with the mess of torn confetti on the table. "Enough," I said. The word was not shouted, but it carried the weight of authority. They all stopped and looked at me. My mother stopped hitting Greg. My father stopped gasping. Keisha stopped crying. They looked at me like I was the only life raft in the middle of the ocean. I walked over to the table and placed the document down. "I am going to give you a choice," I said. "A choice you do not deserve." I pointed to the document. "This is a new agreement. It is not a settlement. It is a surrender." I held up 3 fingers. "Condition number 1. You will sign a complete and permanent severance of all familial ties. That means you are no longer my parents. You are no longer my sister. You are strangers. You will never contact me again. You will never speak my name in public. You will never come within 500 feet of me, my home, or my office. If you do, the restraining order kicks in automatically and you go to jail." I held up a second finger. "Condition number 2. Keisha, you will go live on Instagram right now. You will apologize. You will admit that everything you said in the previous video was a lie, manufactured to extort money from me. You will tell the world that I have been nothing but generous, and that you were motivated by jealousy and greed. You will leave that video up forever." I held up the third finger. "Condition number 3. Greg and Dad, you will sign a confession admitting to the attempted extortion today. I will keep that confession and this red binder in a safe deposit box. As long as you follow rules 1 and 2, the binder stays in the box. The IRS never sees it. But if you ever whisper a bad word about me, if you ever try to sue me again, if you ever look in my direction, I mail it to the Criminal Investigation Division." I checked my diamond watch. "You have 5 minutes to decide." After 5 minutes, I walk out that door, and I go straight to the FBI. The room was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. 5 minutes to choose between total humiliation or federal prison. Greg looked at the paper. He looked at the red binder. He looked at his wife. "Keisha, we cannot sign this," he whispered. "It admits to extortion. If she leaks it later." Shut up, Greg Keisha hissed. She stood up. She walked over to the table. She did not look at me. She did not look at her husband. She looked only at the pen. She picked it up. I have a brand to protect, she muttered. I cannot be married to a felon. She signed her name with a flourish. Keisha Brooks. She signed away her sister. She signed away her husband's dignity. She threw everyone under the bus to save her Instagram account. She handed the pen to my mother. Mom, sign it, Keisha ordered. Do it before she changes her mind. Viola looked at me. Her eyes were wet. Sophia, please, she whispered. We are your family. You cannot make us strangers. Who will take care of us? I looked at her coldly. You should have thought about that before you tried to rob me, Mom. Sign the paper. Viola signed. Her hand was shaking so badly the signature was barely legible. She sobbed as she wrote, mourning the loss of her retirement plan, not the loss of her daughter. Then she handed the pen to Byron. My father looked at me one last time. He looked for a trace of the little girl who used to sit on his lap. He found only the CEO he had created. He took the pen. He did not say a word. He signed. That left Greg. He was standing alone in the middle of the room. His wife had turned her back on him. His in-laws were weeping on the sofa. He was the architect of the failure and he had no leverage left. Sign it, Greg, I said softly. Or, I make the call right now. Greg walked to the table. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. He picked up the pen. He signed. I reached out and took the paper. I checked the signatures. They were all there. I folded the document and put it in my bag. I picked up the red binder. The pastor, who had been silent this whole time, cleared his throat. Sophia, he said tentatively. Does this mean... Are we done? I looked at the pastor. We are done, Pastor. You witnessed it. You saw the truth. Now you can go back to your church and preach about greed. I turned to my family. My former family. Keisha, start the live stream, I said. I will be watching from the car. I turned around and walked toward the door. I did not look back. I heard Keisha's voice behind me pitching up into her fake influencer tone. Hey guys, I have a really important update. I messed up. I walked out into the night air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I had walked in with a burden, and I was leaving light as a feather. I had lost a family, but I had saved myself, and that was a trade I would make every single time. The fallout was not immediate, but it was inevitable, like a slow-moving landslide that finally claims the house sitting precariously on the cliff. 3 months have passed since I walked out of my parents' front door, leaving behind a red binder and a shattered illusion. In those 3 months, the silence from my family has been absolute. They signed the agreement, and for the first time in their lives, they honored a contract. Not out of integrity, but out of fear. They knew I was watching. They knew the IRS was just one phone call away. I did not have to lift a finger to destroy them. That is the tragedy of people like my family. They were already destroying themselves. I just stopped being the safety net that caught them every time they fell. The house on Maple Street was sold on the courthouse steps 2 weeks after our meeting. My father tried to get a bridge loan. He tried to sell the furniture. He even tried to appeal to the bank manager as a man of the cloth. But banks do not care about sermons, and they certainly do not care about excuses. They care about liquidity, and without my money flowing into their accounts, my parents were dry. I had my assistant attend the auction just to observe. She told me it was a sad affair. My mother sat in her car across the street, watching strangers bid on the home she had once claimed was her queendom. She did not look like the woman who had demanded a mansion in the Hamptons. She looked small. She looked old. The house sold for less than the debt owed on it. They walked away with nothing. No equity, no legacy, just a few boxes of clothes and a lifetime of regret. They moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of town. It is a noisy neighborhood. The walls are thin. There is no space for a formal dining room table. There is no room for a throne for my father to sit on and judge the world. I imagine they spend their days blaming each other. My father blaming my mother for spending too much. My mother blaming Greg for losing it all. But they will never blame themselves. That would require a level of self-reflection they are incapable of possessing. Greg and Keisha did not survive the crash. Their marriage was built on the shaky foundation of shared delusion, and when the money ran out, the love evaporated. Greg is back living in his mother's basement. I heard through the grapevine that he is facing an investigation from the state insurance board for his previous fraudulent claims. He is unhireable. The man who lectured me on EBITDA and cash flow is now driving for a rideshare app, trying to make enough money to pay his legal fees. And Keisha, my sister, the golden child, the influencer. Last week I was walking past a discount grocery store downtown. I usually do not shop there, but I was looking for a specific type of organic ginger beer they stock. As I stood in the checkout line, I saw her. She was wearing a polyester smock. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, not a braid or a weave in sight. She was scanning items, her long acrylic nails gone, replaced by short practical ones. She looked up as she handed a customer a receipt. Her eyes met mine. For a second I thought she would scream. I thought she would make a scene, but she just froze. The shame on her face was visceral. She looked at my suit. She looked at the peace in my eyes. And then she looked down at her register. She did not say a word. She did not claim to be a victim. She just kept scanning. I realized then that her punishment was not the job. There is dignity in honest work. Her punishment was the loss of her audience. She was no longer the star of her own reality show. She was just another face in the crowd, anonymous and ordinary. The brand she had tried to protect by betraying me was dead. I walked out of the store without buying my ginger beer. I did not need to rub it in. Life had humbled her more effectively than I ever could. Now I am sitting on the terrace of my penthouse. The wind is cool up here, 50 stories above the city. The noise of the traffic below is just a gentle hum. To my left is a bottle of vintage wine. Real wine, not the cheap stuff I brought to that final dinner. To my right is my tablet showing the quarterly earnings for Greenstream Logistics. We are up another 15%. The board is happy, the investors are happy, but more importantly, I am happy. For years I thought happiness meant their approval. I thought if I just made enough money, if I just achieved enough success, they would finally look at me and see me. I thought I could buy my way into their hearts. But you cannot buy what is not there. You cannot fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. People always say that blood is thicker than water. They use it as a weapon to keep you tethered to toxic people. They tell you that you only get one family, and you have to stick by them no matter what. They tell you that forgiveness is a duty. But they are wrong. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. Sometimes you have to look at the people who share your DNA and realize that they are the cancer that is killing you. In medicine, when a limb is gangrenous, you do not keep it because you are attached to it. You cut it off. You cut it off to save the body. You cut it off to survive. I lost a father that night. I lost a mother. I lost a sister. But look at what I found. I found the silence of a Sunday morning without criticism. I found the joy of a bank account that is mine and mine alone. I found the freedom to walk into a room and know that the people there love me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I took a sip of wine. The city lights twinkled below me like diamonds. My father wanted to charge me $130 million for his love. He thought that was the value of his presence in my life. He was wrong about the valuation. His absence. The peace I feel right now. The safety of knowing I will never be used again. That is worth far more than $325 million. That is priceless. I put the tablet down. I am done looking at the numbers. I am done looking at the past. The red binder is in a safe deposit box, and I hope I never have to open it again. But it is there. A reminder that I am not powerless. A reminder that I am the author of my own story. My name is Sophia Brooks. I am a CEO. I am a survivor. And for the first time in my life, I am free. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever felt guilty for choosing your own mental health over family expectations, I hope this gives you the strength to stand your ground. You are not an ATM. You are not a doormat. You are the CEO of your own life. Do not let anyone, not even your parents, vote you off the board. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is okay to walk away. And let me know in the comments, have you ever had to cut off a family member to save yourself? I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is thriving. This journey taught me that sharing DNA makes you relatives, but only loyalty and respect make you family. For years, I measured my worth by my father's approval, believing my success would finally make him love me. But I learned the hard way that you cannot buy affection from people committed to misunderstanding you. Walking away wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a necessary act of survival. My greatest asset wasn't the $325 million valuation, it was the realization that I am enough on my own. You are the CEO of your life. Never be afraid to fire toxic board members. If this story inspired you to prioritize your peace over their expectations, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs the strength to walk away today.